I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Start off with any public comments for items that are not on the agenda or items that have public hearings attached to them. Anyone? A hand raised.
Good afternoon.
Say your name, please.
I was getting to that. Evidently not fast enough. My name is Michael Shatkin. I'm going to preface what I'm going to say by saying I have the highest regard for the Marine personnel that Shelter Island has and for the work that they do. And I fully appreciate the importance of having the right equipment for that.
We are going to have a presentation, so do you want to hold your comments until that presentation?
I suspect I'm on firm grounds because I'm probably going to be talking about something very different than the presentation. So hear me out, and you feel a need to stop because this is going to be concurrent with the presentation. Obviously, other
I
opportunities
just
to
thought
do
I'd
so.
toss that out there.
I'm really not here to talk about the particulars of the boat in terms of what that discussion, which has been a detailed discussion, and I don't have any real feelings about whether there should or should not be a boat. I'm here to talk about really the context, I think, in which the discussion about acquisitions should occur. And the context that I think that is obvious to all, but I want to make certain it's a factor in this deliberations of this group, is about a third roughly of the island are retirees that are feeling in the larger context a significant amount of pressure, seeing their retirement and their fixed income and assets go down in the current economy, and seeing costs rising. Costs of things like our taxes, costs of things like our insurance. To insure a house on the island has become almost undoable, but certainly prohibitively expensive. I want that sort of context of what islanders are facing to be a factor in capital improvements and the expenditures that this board considers. That's the national context. I could go into a lot of detail, but it's the same thing that we've all been exposed to about inflation and stagflation and all other types of economic threats to a very large segment of islanders. The other context that I would like to put discussions about capital improvements into is the context of priorities of this group. And I think every single one sitting at the table has made it their number one priority to address water quality and infrastructure. That is not only a priority in times of deliberations, but one would also think it's a priority in terms of expenditures. And dollars are dollars. People don't look at it in terms of one category versus the other. They look at it as all coming from one set of pockets, which are the taxpayer dollars. The other ensuing high priority that this board faces is a needs assessment. And the needs assessment is obviously done for a very pressing reason. That we look around this building and we see significant shortfalls in terms of spatial needs and also needs in terms of even though the buildings are well maintained, these are repurposed buildings. They weren't purposely built for the functions that are within them. And they're we know without looking at the completed document, we know that the outcome of the needs assessment is going to be a big ticket for that same, competing for that same set of dollars. So again, I think that marine safety is important. Having the buoys placed in the right locations is important. But one must question how this was done in the past without this vote, and what the alternatives are. There's always an initial response to do things with our own personnel, and that should be the best bang for the dollars. But that's not always the case when we're talking about an expense purchasing of a relatively expensive piece of equipment, a depreciating asset that requires personnel to operate and ongoing maintenance expenses. So the question comes down to, has there been an analysis of costs that outsource this to many islanders that have this capability, or outsource it to surrounding communities that have this capability? Has that analysis been done? And is it part of this consideration and discussion? And again, I don't know the answer to this question, whether the vote that is under consideration today is the best bang for the dollars, and that it's an absolute need rather than a desire. I really don't know the answer. I'm just asking, and I have every confidence in this board's ability to dig into this issue thoroughly and to come up with the right decision on behalf of the taxpayers of the island. But my, wish and the purpose of my standing here is to put the conversation into a different context, a larger context than what I've heard as part of the conversations that have taken place on this issue. Thank you for your time.
Is there anyone in the physical audience who has any public comments? Anyone on Zoom? Okay. Then we will go to our next agenda item, which is, it was just added earlier today after our town board meeting last night, where we accessed some equipment, and it was requested that Ken Lewis come before the board and just explain the process, excuse me, for accessing equipment and what was being gotten deleted.
Okay. How's everybody doing today?
Hey, Chiquine.
Yeah, I caught a piece of the meeting last night and I saw that you had a couple of questions about it. So if there's something in particular you'd like to ask, I'll just give you sort of a, synopsis of what's going on. So I gave a photo list to Amber Wilson of things that we need to have declared as surplus. In order for us to access anything, any piece of equipment, it needs to go through board approval. And so I had to request the surplus formally. Last night you approved it. The items that I'm trying to unload here can be done in a variety of different ways. If they're in good enough condition, there will be some that are added to a resource called Municipid, which some of you may have heard of. Basically, it's a municipal auction house. So we have identified a couple of the items that will go to Municipid. There are some items that also can be just, that could be sold locally if by the determination of myself and my staff, meaning my mechanics and some of my operators, as long as it's within my purview as the superintendent, and then checking with our council that if something is determined that I feel like that we can get at least what is deemed as the fair market value of something, I'm allowed to exercise that. And so I could sell it locally to someone if say a landscaper, or in the event we have a couple of salt spreaders, somebody that's a landscaper that maintains road, driveways, and parking lots or something, if they were interested in something, they could, I could sell it to them, without it having to bid anywhere. Most of these items that are on this list are very old. Some have, all of them actually predate me, and have been, most of them sitting in the, either in the old highway yard or the current highway yard for almost as long as I've been employed by the town, which is now 12 years. So some of them are way overdue. Some of them will be only probably put out to scrap, which is going to fetch us more money than anybody would ever pay for them, because some of them are so antiquated, and that's again from recommendations of my mechanics and people that have worked on them. Some of it is also, it's a space constraint. We're running out of space at our own, our own facility, and with the potential of affordable housing possibly making its way to the old highway facility property. I've been in a slow process of trying to get things out of there that are no longer in use, are again antiquated, broken down, because we're going to need eventually, if that all comes to fruition, we're going to need to clear out the space. And some of that space is going to have to then be taken up back at our facility that we have right now. So anyway, so this was the list that I presented that you approved last night. We went over it with the mechanics again, operators and myself, and identified these items as things that we would like to try to, obviously I'll try to get as much money as we can for them. But some of them are like, there's a couple of things that I think will do okay for us municipal wise, but I think some of these things are going to be, they're mostly sellable for parts or for scrap. So that's the thought process with it.
Ken, you indicated that a lot of these have been just taking up space, have been used. So there's no intent to replace any of these now?
Most of these things
No
have already
need.
been replaced. Most of these items have already been replaced over
Have
the
been
years.
replaced.
Yeah.
All right, so there's
Those
nothing,
are, like we're not, like for example, the first item that we talked about, the forklift, for example, we have 2 operating forklifts. This is a third forklift that was purchased, I can't even remember when. And it was purchased, I think, secondhand or came to us some other way. So we're not in need of another forklift. Well, like I said, most of these things have already been, the largest dump truck that you see on that list that has the dump truck with a plow and a spreader, that was all part of the initial piece that we replaced, 3 new trucks back in 2018 or whatever. So that truck, for example, has been sitting there for that while. And most of it's not, the spreader on it, for example, is in need of some parts. But it's all one big package, and you'd be surprised at people that, would be interested in taking something like that and making a project out of it, or taking it for parts of something that they were used. The plow is still good, that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, nothing is, nothing.
there's no replacement along with this, okay. All
No,
right.
no, most of them have already been replaced. It's mostly about trying to create some space and really get rid of some things that we don't really need to be sitting
Cleaning up.
around taking up space.
Any other questions?
Sure.
Last week, our insurance agent was in, and so I gave her this list, knowing that it was coming onto the agenda, and so she was just going to wait for confirmation that we did indeed access these, so they will be coming off of our insurance policy as well. Any questions from the public? Anyone on Zoom? Thank you, Ken.
Can I just add one, since I have the microphone for 1 second, I just like to take the chance. So just so everybody knows, we try to, this is a popular time of year where we do a lot of brush cutting and roadside cutting in preparation for the spring before everything starts to pop into bloom. So we are currently working in the Silver Beach area and working our way towards West Neck Road, coming out of Silver Beach into West Neck. We're going to be doing some cutting in Westmoreland, and on Terry Drive, and working our way back out of West Neck. So we do try to communicate as best we can. I have the police have just loaned me the mobile sign, so we put up some dates for Westmoreland in particular. But we're continuing to do so. There are some already pre-identified areas that have been contacted even by Brian prior to me as to needing to being cut. And so we try to reach out to those homeowners directly prior to doing so. Again, we try, to put as much information out there as possible so that people know when we are coming in to do so. Obviously, we can't get through to everybody, but I do try to let everybody know that at least we're going to be in a region. We did notify the Silver Beach Association about this when we started it. And I will do so moving forward with other areas if we go into Hay Beach or those kinds of places. But just so people know what's going on. It's sometimes, unfortunately, we can't get through to everybody, but I'm always available for a phone conversation and to, talk to anybody and explain what we're doing in case there's any questions. But it's a very important part of what we do, in trying to keep the shoulders open and the roadsides clear for, people to safely get off the road, whether on a bicycle, walking, for emergency vehicles. I just ask the public to, bear with us a little bit as we do it. And again, we'll do our best to communicate to everyone, but if there's anybody that have any questions, they feel free to call the office. Thanks.
All right, our next agenda item is a workboat proposal, and Harbor Master Bo Payne is here to present that topic.
I have eight, hopefully we'll address some of your questions. Some other ones that come up along the way. We currently have a 30-year-old fiberglass center console workboat. So the town owns it. One of only two boats that the town does technically own. The other is our police banana boat, the inflatable yellow boat that we have. This particular boat falls under Ken's purview. It's under the Department of Public Works. Butch and I work in that role. Butch works specifically for Ken in that role, and I get kind of linked over there periodically as needed to provide extra staff on the water for the waterways related work that needs to be done. Boat, as I mentioned, is 30 years old. The town has had it for no less than 25 years in service. That's how long Butch has been specifically doing the buoys, and he was here before him, but he can't recall when. The boat has had the transom replaced once already. The deck is now in need of replacement. The hull sides are beginning to crack. They've been reinforced previously, but they need additional work. The motor's been replaced once. It is still currently good and functioning. There's nothing wrong with the current engine. The trailer we've replaced at least one time through sort of a conglomeration of parts, pieces that were left around that didn't get accessed in time, things that we recovered from the dump that were dumped somewhere along the way. So we've pushed this along for quite a while. But at the end of the day, everything reaches the end of its life eventually, and this boat is now at that point. To that end, we've identified that we want to continue to be able to provide this service in-house, which is what all of our municipal neighbors do. They all do this themselves. We have the in-house expertise on staff already to do that. So with an eye towards continuing to be able to provide this service, we want to replace the piece of equipment that we need to provide that service. Working with Ken, Butch and I worked with a reputable, well-known designer of aluminum boats to develop a purpose-built vessel for our application. It is slightly larger, it's 24 feet instead of 20 foot. Stuck with the center console concept. And working with that designer, specifically going through all of the things that we actually do with the boat, we came up with a design that Christine, I think you can put up. Some of you, all of you probably have seen it by now. I don't know if the public has or not, right? It's a center console workboat. Not a whole lot of frills to look at. Some of the things that this boat is used for, all the things that this boat is used for, is everything that happens on the waterways, right? So specifically, the aids navigation, your red and green buoys, the information buoys, the 5 mile an hour buoys, the anchorage area buoys, the swim area buoys, right? Also information. The swim lines at both of the public beaches that we have, so those roped off areas, right? We install them, we take them out. Moving forward, this would be the platform that we would continue to use or like to use to continue our town seating program that we do in conjunction with Cornell Cooperative, who I think is going to be here today. So that's cool. We use this for removing derelict moorings, pretty much anything that might go out on the water is what this boat would be used for, other than patrol functions, right? This is not intended to be a police vessel. It's not intended to be a patrol boat. We designed it with an eye towards only being able to be used as a work platform. We went as far as not putting seating in it. There's no seats in the boat, right? This isn't intended to be on for long periods of time, relaxing or doing anything like that. Its sole mission is to work for the people of Shelter Island. There's been some, I guess, discussion and debate about, the design of the boat, why we went with a V-hull or instead of a flat hull and a center console instead of a forward console, lots of things. All of those things have a lot of merit, right? And each of those boats' designs have various amounts of utility for different components of the job that this boat will do. In our professional experience, based on our actual experience doing these tasks, we felt that this platform in this configuration represented the best all-around option for what we're trying to accomplish. If it was a single platform for a single job, then we certainly could have considered some other options. But overall, this represented the type of versatility that we're looking for. Right, so that's kind of hopefully addresses why we went that route. So after identifying, this need and identifying what we feel is an appropriate solution to address that need, we wanted to try to tackle ahead of time the never-ending question of how do we pay for this, right? Because everybody wants and needs money to pay for all of the things that they say they need. And as we are all aware, as Jackie pointed out, things are tight. Our plan or thought from the beginning of this entire project was to fund this using the Waterways Fund. That's, for those of you who don't know, user-derived fund that's driven primarily by mooring fees. And since 2018 or thereabouts, when the boat storage fees, the kayak racks, if you will, those fees, familiar with that one now, aren't you? I impounded Ben's kayak. Sorry. It's supposed to be out of there. Nonetheless, the fees that you paid to keep your kayak there also go into this Waterways Fund. Historically, this fund recruits fees over a period of time and then has been used periodically for larger, once in a lifetime or certainly once in several generations, expenses, capital expenses. Much of the work that was done at Bridgewood Lane in that area to improve that whole area was partially funded, at least initially, from this waterways fund. I believe ultimately there was some grant money that filtered back in for that. Some of the work that was done at Taylor's Island on the bulkheads, right? So large items that are not specifically planned for in an annual budget, ideally would be looked at in a longer term planning, needs assessment type thing, but have somehow come to the forefront without having been adequately planned for ahead of time. So this fund, which was established, I don't even know when, I've been trying to find that out, quite a long time ago, and is specifically earmarked for expenses associated with waterways management and the services, et cetera, related thereto. I take kind of a simple look at that and think to myself, all of waterways management happens on Shelter Island with the aid of a waterways workbook. So it seemed fairly straightforward to me that this fund would be a good starting point, right? To fund this project with the added benefit of that is not an amount of money that has been derived from a budget in any particular year. It's all user derived, all the money.
It's not coming from the tax base, like we're not increasing taxes by.
I didn't want to have Ken stand here and say, we need to increase this line item by $172,500, right? I think that would be probably laughed at pretty quickly, especially in this budget environment, right? So we thought that this was a fairly clever and particularly appropriate use of these funds. To that end, we went one step further. We identified how much money is in that fund, right? Because if there's not enough in there to begin with, then we're barking up the wrong tree. The boat won't float, if you will. At the end of 2023, there was $209 plus or minus $1,000 in that fund. And that was a stable balance throughout that year. It's my understanding that there's some upper level budgeting things that go on that involves funding things from there and moving monies around. And that's out of my purview. I kind of, again, took a simple look at it and said, well, we have $209,000 sitting in this account for the past 12 months. We need $172,500 for this project. Simple math would say, hey, there's enough in there. If all things were just very, very, very straightforward. So when we completed the design, we started to discuss this. We discussed it with the capital planning and grants committee first. I've been keeping the Waterways Advisory, WMAC, Waterways Management Advisory Council abreast of the developments in this and have told them that it is our intention to use this fund for that. The reason I bring that up is there's some confusion sometimes about what the Waterways Fund is, who ultimately has the authority to use funds from it. That's the town board. But historically, I believe it's been with the advice or at least counsel of the WMAC, right? So we're trying to keep everybody all on the same page. After all, it is the Waterways Management Advisory Council, and this vessel is for waterways management. So we try to work with everybody on that. After sort of going through some of this, having some conversations, specifically with Councilman Gooding, the WMAC brought up the concept of having pump out capability, right? Having a pump out vessel that's come and gone in conversation for the town and been for many, many, many years. And that generally falls apart under the who's gonna pay for it, who's gonna staff it, and so on and so forth, considerations. After talking about this platform, right, again, we're trying to make a platform that can do a lot of jobs. Ken and Joe and I started exploring the option of adding pump out capability to this boat. To that end, we identified, if you could bring up page 3 on that, that'd be great. There is a couple of manufacturers. This particular one is typically a manufacturer of fixed pump out facilities, so things you would find at marinas, things like that. But it's a representation of what would be available from a bunch of different manufacturers. This is a wholly enclosed or self-contained pump out facility that would be able to be simply placed on the deck of this boat. The boat is more than sufficient to handle this operation. To increase the overall utility of this platform, right? When we're not using it for a waterways workboat doing buoys or seating or whatever, hypothetically or theoretically, you know, we could place this on there and with quite literally almost no modifications to the boat, have yourself a town pump out boat. That brings us to questions about who pays to operate that, who staffs that. I've worked with Jen Masiano, what's the last?
Hingham.
Hingham, thank you. Who's the town's grant writer, to identify potential grant opportunities to cover all or most of the cost of that device. And then the grant would also potentially be able to cover the operation of the vessel, staffing of the vessel, and things like that. So we hypothetically could add a whole additional layer of use to this particular platform at very little or hopefully no additional cost. And, you know, would thereby increase the utility of the boat to the town pretty significantly. I point out that a fiberglass hull has lasted us 25 years now, the town 25 years. In moving to a aluminum hull, which is a bit more standard for a workboat platform of this nature. This is not we're gonna replace this every 2 or 3 years type of concept. This is something that will be in service to the town for decades. I hope one day my son is up here asking you guys to replace it, you know, not you guys, for the next town board, right?
Yeah, 40 years, we have a problem.
You know, we did, I know Mr. Shagin had mentioned, you know, talking about different ideas to address the same outcome or achieve the same outcome. And something that you mentioned kind of struck a chord with me, right? We're in a building that's been repurposed for something that it wasn't originally intended for, right? That's what we have now with our current workboat. We have a private, personal, recreational boat that was adapted over many, many, many years to fit the needs of the town at the time and as they grew. And unfortunately, now we need to replace that, and rather than continue to look at a platform that would be something that would need to be adapted or adjusted, or it could probably work. We wanted to plan ahead. That seems to be a big thing lately, right? We're talking about planning a lot. And get the right piece of equipment now, so we don't have to worry about that for many, many, many years in the future. Given the complexity with purchasing a new boat, I would recommend that we start to plan to replace the next one right away. Seems like it's a big deal. So, Jen, you have anything to add to that?
Only that, I think also to just speak to a little bit, I know Joe, I don't know if Joe was on specifically right now, but Joe and I, when talking with O2, did, there was some, and Joe could speak to it probably better, but we did look at some other options as far as, contracting out to other contractors, renting or leasing a vessel with a captain. So Joe could maybe speak to that a little bit better if you'd like, but in general, I mean, I think what Bo was saying here, I think is an important facet to what I subscribe to at the highway department too. I mean, we're not, when we're looking at equipment to purchase for things, we look at what our use for it is, what our need is involved in it, and also, to try to do something in the most professional manner that we possibly can. And to buy something used or something that doesn't really fit the need that you really need, I think is short-sighted. And I think you need to have the proper equipment to do the proper job. And I know there's been a lot of questions about this, and I know there's been people that have spoken out even publicly about it. In my position as the highway superintendent and the public works commissioner, I rely pretty heavily on my staff to give me insight into something that maybe I don't know as much about, and look for them to give me, like, if I go to look for a new front loader, or I go to look, even though I have my own practical experience and my own lifetime of work and heavy equipment, but I do like to find out what other guys that are using it currently are gonna be doing. And in this case, we have two outstanding, employees, both bay constables, both young guys that not only work with this boat on the regular, but have grown up in these waters their whole life. And Butch specifically has been in operation of that boat for 25 years of its 30-year lifespan, okay? And so I think, I personally look to people like that to say, these are the guys doing the work. And so if the design of the boat is what they've painstakingly, I might add, gone to the lengths to try to secure it, I support that, because I look to them. I'm not a boat guy, but they are, and they're the guys doing the work. And so I look at that as from my perspective, that's who I would look to for my advice. I don't know if Joe wants to just chime in about what our other options were, but.
I'll just add that when we priced the alternatives of contracting out, we found that the current local pricing scheme for contracting would be greater than the amortization rate on this particular boat if it was purchased. So our annual expense of having a third party do this work would be greater based on today's current market rate than if we own the boat ourselves over and amortize that over the projected life of the vessel. So as a comparison, contracting out appears to be more expensive.
You guys have any questions for me?
One question. Let's all be contributing to the fun tomorrow. I have no idea what the secondary market looks like for a craft of this description. Did you spend a lot of time looking around the Northeast for something like this?
Not a whole lot of time looking at used equipment, to be honest with you, right? Again, we are of the mindset that this boat, as designed, is designed for the job that we're looking for. And obtaining a used boat in a secondary market and then adapting that would invariably still be very expensive, probably less expensive, but we would ultimately still not end up with the boat that we need for all of the jobs that we're doing. We have a boat that could potentially work, but it wouldn't be the boat that we've identified as being able to fulfill our needs.
On the pump out, I think you answered my question, because so that unit that you showed us can be taken on and off.
Yeah.
Because if it's on, then it takes up half the boat.
Right, fully modular is the idea, so that way When the mission is buoy tending, we have that off and we have full space on the boat for buoy operations. Then, let's say, mid-July, right, we're not doing much buoy tending at that time. All the buoys have to be in, generally speaking, by late spring. The boat could very easily be converted to a pump-out vessel by simply adding that, mounting, attaching it to the boat so it doesn't move, and getting underway with that purpose specifically. If there was something that came along in August, oyster seeding, if you will, right? We had that kind of spring up this past August. We could pull the boat out on its trailer, bring it to the highway yard in 15, 20 minutes time with the machine, have that removed, set off to the side, relaunch the boat, and be back in the water now as a oyster seeding platform.
And if the number sticks at 172, what's the value of the existing boat that you hope to recoup?
I don't think it's particularly high.
Because isn't the engine fairly new?
The engine is fairly new, and like I said, yeah, so it's I think 6 years old now, but still has fairly low hours, excellently maintained. That arguably is the only thing that holds any value in that boat. But I would think certainly not much more than the value of that used engine itself, right? So sub $10,000 without a doubt, significantly less, I would guess.
Is your plan to hold that engine as a spare or to sell it and it's
No, I
now
think-
162,000?
Right, yeah, so I think the most prudent concept would be to sell the current workboat when we have a new replacement, right? As a complete unit, a boat motor trailer, right? That generally, as you know, boating people, right? You can generally get a higher value for that than hypothetically, if we just had this bare broken hull, we're probably not gonna get anything for just the hull. So the concept was to sell it as a complete unit, but if it was determined that there was a better way to access that and get rid of it, then we would certainly follow that.
Could we use the existing engine and not purchase a new engine?
So you're not the first person to ask that. Unfortunately, no, right? This vessel, that's a 20-foot fiberglass vessel. This is a 24-foot aluminum vessel designed to hold significantly more weight, designed to move significantly more weight. So no, the engine is not sufficient by any stretch of imagination to power the new boat.
Oh, when would you get the new boat if you ordered it now?
So-
January next year, maybe, at best?
If, when we put it out the bid to get some quotes, we stipulated I believe it's 9 months, right? 9 month, return to sea trials. So we wanted to have it in the water and try, running it, putting it through the paces, 9 months from the date of going to contract. I think realistically, if the decision was today, it's 12 months, start to finish, right?
So what's the plan for this year?
We're gonna continue to use what we have, right? We're gonna strengthen up anything that we can clearly identify needs addressing. We're gonna press it into service again and continue going. But that's part of the, I guess, the desire to continue this conversation and move it forward is that we're not talking about going and buying a truck off a lot either. Right, this is something that's going to take a fair amount of time, so what we have is already going to get that much further, behind the 8 ball, if you will, by the time it's even.
But it is usable.
It's going to be, right, we're gonna make it usable, yep. I'll be back if it's not.
It's usable, but it's also honestly, it could be one incident away from not being usable, one mooring mushroom is on the deck and goes through the deck, or one of the guys goes through the deck. I mean, I think it's, they'll put it back together. I mean, they'll put it together and get it ready for what they need to do. But I think, it's definitely, it's lived its life. There's no question about it.
But again, we don't wait until the roof fails on the building to replace the roof, right? We want to try to plan ahead. So we're saying that it needs to be replaced, acknowledging that there is a very, very small amount of utility left in it that we plan to squeeze out as much as we can. But being able to get through this season and the fall, should not be misconstrued as we could probably squeeze through the next season as well, and the next season, and keep pushing it along. But in the near term, yes, the plan is to continue using it as long as we can.
Oh, I just don't think this is the year
That's,
at all.
yeah,
I understand
sure,
where you're coming from, what your ask is, but I just don't think this year is the year,
yeah.
my opinion.
I just have a design question, and I'm sure you've already looked at this. The side door, are you gonna be pulling gear in and out of that? Because I was thinking you might want it a little wider than 2.5 feet if possible. I know the size of the boat probably constrains how big that door can be.
No, we made it that wide specifically because it's wide enough to get the largest of the moorings that we handle through safely, as well as all of the buoys that we have. Right? We specifically forbid that.
Yeah, because I mean, I've just been stuck in situations where I'm trying to do something very similar with on land, but hauling things through, and I'm like, it's just too
Yeah.
small, it's really frustrating
Yeah.
when you feel like you're wrestling for every inch.
Yeah, the designer at Response Marine was sort of a nudge about that sort of stuff, because he didn't want us to come back to him and say, why did you stipulate a 2-foot door? Nothing we have fits through a 2-foot door. So he made us provide him with a list of the things that we have or that we would reasonably expect to be dealing with in the design phase.
I have a couple. One of your stated reasons for wanting it is you want to keep this, providing the service in-house. But I'm thinking if we outsourced and just outsourced a boat and a captain, but use our people to do the actual work of the buoys, wouldn't that still accomplish that goal?
Yes. Yep. And I believe, if Joe is still on there, I believe that was the model that he had actually looked into. Right, was getting a barge, a small barge, up with an operator, right, because they're not gonna let us use their barge. And then using our staff that we already have with our equipment on that barge, a day rate for doing that. Not specifically outsourcing all of the labor and everything, which I assume would be more expensive.
Another question is, in looking at amortizing the boat and using 172,500, it's a little less than $6,000 a year over 30 years. But how often would engines need to be replaced, and what's the current cost of the engine that we're purchasing?
Yeah, so ideally, I would like to say that I don't believe that the engine that we would buy with this boat would need to be replaced in the next, if we're expecting a 30-year lifespan, in 15 years, right? Like I would say, based on the current and anticipated hours of use and the current maintenance schedule and level of maintenance that we keep these engines at, I think that 15 years would be a pretty reasonable estimate. Probably, actually, I can tell you, we just got 2 engines on a grant from the state for the police boat this past year. I believe it was 24,000 for an engine of comparable size, so somewhere in that range. That's acquiring an engine through the state contract system.
Sounds kind of pretty good.
Yeah, oh, it's way cheap, you can't get them. At retail for that? No.
Take what?
Oh, there was a question at one point too, maybe it wasn't perfectly clear in the paperwork, but this is for a boat, motor, trailer, electronics, everything. It's not anything that we would then get and have to find an engine for, order a trailer for. We stipulated that we wanted this ready to go to work immediately.
And Joe, you did the work on figuring out what it would cost to outsource?
He's not on.
Oh. Do you know? He gave you that figure, annual figure? How many times? You probably got off
I
the
thought he
list.
said it was about, I thought he just told me it was about 30,000.
Is that something that we could go out and get hard quotes on? Because for me, I'm looking at this as purely a numbers thing, is if like, if we can cobble through this year and possibly next year, but in the following year, like what's gonna be our annual cost?
Yeah, I mean, hypothetically, we could probably do RFQ, whatever it's called, right, for some sort of stipulated services and put it out. I think it would be a little difficult to compare cost of services estimates for this year or obtained this year for potentially 2 budget cycles away from now, if that's kind of where you were thinking. But it certainly would give a jumping off point. It's not gonna get less between them.
Right, and yeah, and I just, right now, all we can use is current dollar
Right.
costs. So that's the analysis that I would want to make.
Gotcha.
Also, are there any anticipated capital expenditures that are gonna hit the waterways fund in the next few years?
To the best of my knowledge, there is very, very little forward-looking planning for the use of the waterways fund.
Well, the last time we hit it hard was the bulkhead at Taylor's Island.
Believe that was.
Well, or Grace's Lane,
Grace's
too,
Lane.
but that was a
Grace's Lane.
combination of things too.
Right.
I mean, you have to
That was-
remember, there's also, you know, in my budget, we have a bulkhead, we have a jetty, and we have a town landing line that already gets, that's where we do repairs and improvements to those things, out of already the budget amounts for me. So that doesn't fall into this.
What's the plan for Shell Beach? The bulkhead replacement there,
There isn't one right now.
there isn't one
For the end.
at the end?
Not right now, no.
That's not my purview, sorry.
No, I mean, that's,
I can't answer it.
Well, my issue is that after coming away from that grants committee, okay, it's not necessarily addressed at you, it's really at the board. Because one of the issues that I have had since that meeting is we triple the funding that we have in that, how that expense is taken care of, okay? We've tripled the mooring rates, okay, which has nothing to do with Bo and his operation. And what I'm looking at is, unless these numbers have changed, okay, from the last time, but as I recall, this is still being, the waterways is really being, is still on coming out of the general fund. If I'm not mistaken, okay, I'm looking at $70,000 coming from the taxpayers.
Yeah, I haven't looked at that spreadsheet in a month, but if it's the one I'm thinking of, yeah, we have the revenues coming in.
Right.
And we have what we have designated, which over the years, it's like, well, this is considered a waterways expenditure.
Right.
And so there has been discussion back and forth over time. Is this truly, like, this was something that used to be funded by taxpayer dollars? We're now utilizing the revenues, but we're short. But the question is are all of these expenses truly waterways? And so we should probably go back to Code Section 90 to.
I mean, it's sort of, from looking from a resident's point of view or from a boater's point of view, we increased mooring fees to pay for some of this stuff.
Which then helped us on the
And
tax.
there's still not enough money to cover it.
Right, which helped us on the
Okay.
tax revenues. It helped us on the tax revenue side. So the mooring fees went up. We were able to reduce what the taxpayers had to pay for with property taxes because we shifted more expenses to advantage those ones.
And I think when we were talking about this, we said that probably it's being expensed it should be expensed a different way. Meaning it should come out of other budgets to afford this. The irony is that how did we ever have $125 a year mooring fees for 3 years, okay, and and now we tripled them, and something changed along the way, and I thought a lot of this was coming through the police budget, but again, I don't even want to go back to that. What I always look at is, it's costing the taxpayers $77,000 a year, even though they tripled the rates. Okay, I think
And
that,
what used to happen is the taxpayers funded more than $70,000 a year. So if you look back at what the old mooring fees were, whatever that differential is between now and then, that used to get paid for by taxpayers. Now it's getting paid for by mooring fees.
I would like to review that, because I don't necessarily think that's true because of the fact that I just don't think that's true. But in any event,
It's massive.
so the issue is then, last night we had a board meeting, and I brought up this one particular item, which was from the transfer of funds from an account number, which was referred to as a council person of 31,000, and it went to the capital grants fund for paying for the Congdon Creek dock. Okay, and you said to me that we ran short, but yet here we have the Waterways Committee that has $200,000 in its bank account, and why wasn't that 200,000 being used to pay for the Congdon Creek?
We would have looked at that if we didn't have an overage in not filling the board member seat. So we could have,
Isn't it I guess I think what I walked away from when we had that meeting is that we have a fund balance, and I guess it was really used for docks. And I think at the time you said that, what docks are we using that we have repairs due within a shortened space? And you said, well, we really up to speed. We don't necessarily need it. So we have a fund balance here, but yet we take this fund and we apply it to the Congdon Creek dock. I guess that's really, I think this is really more of a board issue that I have with, in terms of this whole funding of your group and how we're allocating money. So I guess that's what and Albert touched on something about, the timing of it. And I guess when you have a $200,000 balance, and not to repeat what I've said before, but I think, the taxes have gone up, insurance is going up, everything is going up, okay? And I don't know whether this is, I don't know how I've heard people say optics don't mean anything, but to me, they do mean something. That how do we say to our residents, okay, I'm sorry about your new assessment, okay, and, you're gonna have to get over it, but yet we're spending, maybe $200,000 on a boat, okay? And but I think I'm more concerned about how the funding is taking place, not necessarily the boat per se, okay? And I think these are the issues that we as a board have to address. I think this is probably more important. How did we get to this particular point where it's not paying for itself? Okay, I thought the whole idea of user fees were to pay, that was the idea of tripling the rates so that it didn't cost the taxpayers money, but yet when we look at it, it really came that way, and I don't know where the other funding came from that offset it, okay? So I do struggle with it, okay, and I think hopefully, we know that the boat that you have is, the motor is reasonably new. I did see the boat when we talked about it, this season would definitely not be there. So I hope that you've spent enough time to get that boat readily available for this particular season, because even for not the spring, but even for the fall, okay, you're still going to be needing it, okay? But, I don't know what more to say to you, because I think that, I think things need replacement. I think the Capital Grants Committee works in the right direction to make sure we have funding available. But perhaps, okay.
That's a good question. Can we jump back there for a second?
Go ahead.
Because we talked to Capital Grants about the pump out piece. is there any possibility of finding funding for the boat?
So the WQIP, it's within their purview that the WQIP actually could pay for a pump out boat.
They could.
Okay, so we really haven't gotten part of that part because the community, or we haven't been decided, well, do we do a pump out boat? Don't we do it? Who's going to monitor it and so forth? But I think the funding has always been available through WQIP, except that I think there were groups within the community that felt we did not need because we had adequate resources on land-based. Am I along with that?
We
None
also
of those
didn't have
other
a boat.
resources are not free. I mean, we just got an engine or two from the police department. I mean, did the capital grants committee have anything to say about funding this boat?
So we looked at a couple of different potential grant opportunities to fund specifically a workboat platform or help fund a workboat platform. And none of the ones that we looked at seemed like they would cover that. After talking with Jen some more, and she had suggested a different program, I don't remember the acronym off the top of my head, but it's a federal program that's administered through the state. The grant that I referred to that could potentially cover the costs of the additional pump out equipment and perhaps the services associated with using that. I asked her if there was a way if we could highlight pump out as a higher level priority for this build, perhaps even as a principal use of this build, in order to qualify for more of that pump out side grant money and work that way. I haven't got an answer back from her specifically on that. I don't know if that's, I'm not quite sure how that works. Maybe we would have to redesign the boat to get it to qualify that way. And in looking through the paperwork that she provided, it is clear that non-covered uses could still, vessels that had purposes that were for not covered uses could still be covered by grant funding, but it would be reduced by the amount that the boat is not used for that grant purpose, right? Which I think is pretty normal for other.
Yeah, which is what happened with, Ken, was it the grinder or the excavator that we got a reduced grant amount?
It was the excavator.
So they actually looked at number of hours used and reduced what the grant award was because it wasn't 100% grant funded.
Right now, we have no grant dollars, so.
Sure, yeah.
And generally, just so you know, those grant dollars take a long time to recoup. We just got paid for the excavator, it was 5 years ago. And they only paid, and they didn't pay what they told you they were gonna pay. So those don't, it's important to look for them, it's important to get them, but you still have to outlay the money most of the time before you do it. And they're not rushing to give it back to you.
It's not
You're in a
given to-
queue of hundreds of thousands of other municipalities and everywhere that do it. So they get to you eventually, but it took, I think the excavator took, I think it's 6 years is actually what it took. So just as a thought.
Bo, I would ask you to see if you can just get through this year, okay, and visit this another time, okay? I guess that's really where I'm coming from. I don't doubt, I know what you're asking for, but I don't know whether this is the appropriate time. I think some things have to be worked out. This whole conversation of pump out boats has occurred for a long time, okay? And it really, I think the Waterways Committee, there were some people who wanted the pump out boat, and then there were others that didn't want it. Okay, and I just think I'd like to see what we could do to take this cost of the waterways off the tax bill to the residents who really don't have boats. Okay, and I think that's the redistribution. But I really would like to go back further to see how this was funded. Before we increased all of our rates, what did it look like? What happened?
It was paid for by tax dollars, but we will go ahead and show you that. Also, some of those costs are the the harbor master salaries. And so there are those who would argue that some of their salary should not be paid with mooring fees. So that 70,000 that isn't covered means that maybe 40% of their salary is getting.
I remember that being, I think that was part of the police budget at one time. It was covered a different way because, it.
Which is.
I think everybody was up in arms over the tripling the rates. And here, if somebody was paying mooring fees, and they would look at this and said, God, you tripled our rates as user fees, but we're also paying for it through our tax dollars. I don't know how someone would question that.
I'll do an analysis. I'll go back a couple of years and
Okay.
pull like how things are paid for, what was covered, what's now covered.
But maybe.
It will, you need a spreadsheet. I can do that.
Okay.
And
I'm not quite sure how.
yeah, it's not your job to.
Obviously, the guy needs to work and is pitching the need, that's all.
It's not your job to answer those questions.
Is there any other board questions before I turn it over to audience questions?
What will it cost what kind of cost to update? I saw your deck's a little bit soft there, so it's not a lot of money just to bring that up to workable condition, the boat
Right,
right?
well,
Yeah.
as we always do, we work in-house, we'll put it in the shop and we'll do what we need to do, and it has a budget for that sort of stuff, so we'll work within the confines of what we have.
I get it, because the approach is, that's good money after bad, really, you know?
Right.
And
At this point.
it's also funded by taxpayer money unless we specifically take whatever those expenses are out of the waterways fund.
Yeah,
So
okay.
just making sure that's clear.
Joe
Thanks,
said it's 30,000+ a year to rent a captain with a barge
Okay, for the
for
time
the
period that
time
we need.
period that we need.
You can sit, but, Michael has a question, so we'll keep you on hand.
Putting the boat aside, because there's been a very thorough and thoughtful discussion about the boat. But I'm just responding to some things I heard on the accounting side. And number one was the issue of people paying for their own incurred expenses. Do we, in fact, if we go out and salvage a failed mooring, should that be an expense that the community bears, or can that be a charge back to the owner of the mooring? Moorings generally perform very well if they're properly serviced and maintained. And the ones that are not properly serviced and maintained have a greater tendency to fail. So I would be inclined not to take that expense onto the community at large. That's one comment. The other comment is the comment I would make about capturing cost in a clear, concise manner. And the thought of the boat, everybody who owns a boat understands the amount of maintenance and costs that are related to a boat. And if you have a conversation about acquisition costs only, it's only half of the expense. If you have a situation, so again, the taxpayers are paying for it. I think what you have to do is thoroughly capture all of the related costs. And then be reasonable about, thoughtful about how you assign those, because there's shared expenses or there's a compelling reason why it shouldn't be all based upon users' fees. But I also have a tenacious memory, and the user fee conversation was sold to the community on the basis that it was going to capture the waterways expenses and charge it to that group that was benefiting from it. And it sounds to me, and just hearing the sort of board member banter back and forth, that we haven't necessarily done that in a thorough manner. We're still half in one expense bucket, and half is bigger capital things like this boat and some dock repairs are in another category. And I don't think that's an effective way to manage unless it's a thorough capture of all the related costs and a careful consideration about where those costs are allocated. Hopefully, we are able to capture them all under the fees, but if we're user fees, but if we're not, it behooves us to understand, how that's extending into another category. That's all.
Are there, Steve, I see you turned on your,
Right. I just thought I'd mention as a general rule, direct costs can be passed along to a user, but overhead cannot. Overhead is paid for by taxpayer dollars. So for example, you wouldn't allocate salaries.
thank you. Anyone else in the physical audience who has a question on this topic? Anyone on Zoom? Okay, so I guess right now we are not going to move forward with this until we do a broader analysis on waterways, or how do you want to proceed?
Look into grants a little deeper.
I'd like to look into the waterways budget and see if we can work it in such a way that it doesn't impact the tax base. You need to do a budget deep dive.
Other thoughts? Come on up.
Carmen, just wondering if Joe said he reached out to other companies to get prices. Can that be presented to the board? Didn't do the thorough work that he does, but a couple of phone calls and my price is half of what his is. And I'm wondering if the WQI money can be used to pay to hire somebody to set those moorings.
Yeah, that is something we need to investigate because WPI money used for operations, we have to like double check and see if that's an allowable use.
I don't think it is.
So some of this,
So at least get his quotes and put that out there.
just,
Also, Tom, you got quotes for
I
someone
just made phone
to,
calls, I didn't go.
well, make phone calls for someone to do that.
You also have to remember they probably have to pay prevailing wage, which they're not gonna tell you.
Right.
And that,
I would just add, I don't know what numbers specifically, Tom's talking about. Be happy to share our quotes, but keep in mind, municipal procurement procedures are certainly different than private mooring contracting. We have minimum insurance requirements, prevailing wage, and bid qualifications that have to be hit. So our price point has to include those types of qualifications for a contractor. And I hear his point because that's certainly something to consider when we're talking about residential pricing. And unfortunately, this is an issue we confront often with putting work out to bid.
Thanks, Joe.
that was one of the things I had is could operational costs on the pump out boat be used from WQI? So no. Okay.
Pump out boat actually, I think, can be covered through WQI.
Oh, if we have operational
I
costs?
believe that can be used for WQI too. We have to double check the legislation, but it specifically calls out a pump out boat. And I
Oh.
believe operation and maintenance is included in the legislation itself.
The new legislation has changed a little bit, so we may actually,
It's always been in there.
It's always been in there. I thought.
Always been in there.
I said WQI, my mistake.
oh, you meant waterways.
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 Got it,
Yeah,
okay,
that's it.
got it, okay.
I ask both questions, but both, so is there in any world, because I don't know.
Keep talking this way for the.
Sorry, I didn't know about the boat, about boat specifically, but is there a way that, like, when we go out, for example, if we buy a new loader, and we have money, I have money in my capital, in my equipment reserve fund, usually we span these things out for sometimes 3 to 5 years, depending on. Is that something that is available in the world of purchasing a workboat like it is with us, because that, you know, yes, there's a finance, you know, it used to be municipal financing was 0. Now it's, you know, I think it's up to 6% or something we were looking at, but it's a way sometimes to soften the blow across the period of time, where you're not pulling $170,000 out of one area. I didn't know if it's possible, if it's the kind of thing that's possible to do, because it would be something that I think could be a recommendation even moving forward. I mean, if it's a piece of equipment that we're gonna need, and it's some way that we could finance.
My counter to that would be when we're dealing with taxpayer money pulls annually to smooth budget spikes, that I'm in favor of doing that when it makes sense to. In this situation, what we would be, the arbitrage isn't there. What we would be paying in interest rates on financing over a number of years is not what we're going to be making on the class account that the waterways money is sitting in. So if that's where it's ultimately coming from, we lose.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was thinking if it ultimately came out of waterways, but if the consensus ends up being that you don't want to take it out of waterways, and then it somehow gets
That's gonna
kicked
be
back
taxed.
somewhere down the road, it's going to need to be done, whether you put it off a year from now or 2 years from now, it's going to have to happen. And if you don't want it to come out of the waterways fund, then maybe it becomes it becomes a discussion to say that we have to take it out of, you know, the highway department and the public works fund, you know, out of my equipment reserve fund. It's a piece of equipment that gets utilized like anything else. And so I don't know, I mean, it's just throwing it out there. I mean, my understanding when we went into this discussion and I know there needs to be some clarification for it, but I felt like one of the better analogies that we had to this, to what what Bo was proposing to do with the waterways fund and the purchase of this is very similar to what we've dealt with the CPF for years. That there's, you know, money in a fund that comes out of, you know, the taxpayer from the purchase of land, you know, properties and sales of properties that then we use for a very specific, you know, need, and it's a very clean draw out of where it is. And I felt like that was my understanding of what this could have possibly been used for. Now, if that's certainly not the case, and if that's something that all of you decide on that it's not a feasible option to do, I just would like to, you know, say that maybe the gear shift that needs to take place is that we might have to look at this from a position of that it has to, you know, it would have to come out of an equipment line essentially. And, you know, and that's taxpayer driven. I mean, that's where that money comes from. So,
Given the time, well, let me just.
Yes, sir.
Real quick, right, so, I don't think that's, a highly probable solution to have the manufacturer finance it, right? Like, in the world of heavy equipment, let's say Caterpillar or something like that, right? It's an enormous organization that has, probably has its own bank in that it owns. These are much smaller operations. This would be, you know, a yard's job for its whole year, right? And then it would move on to the next job. So it's certainly worth asking, obviously, if we were to go that route, say, hey, we're getting to the point that we think we would go with you, what would be an option? I wouldn't put too many eggs in that basket, but it dawns on me that because of the timeline, and maybe if there was some clever way in choosing when to execute a contract, that there could be some sort of self-financing, right? Where we use some portion of waterways in 1 year and some portion of a capital reserve, if you will, equipment reserve. And then because the next payment for the boat, or the final payment for the boat would be in the next fiscal year, you work some combination of that again, whereby you're not completely depleting this user-derived fund, the waterways fund, Tom, at any given time, and then hopefully trying to get it to refill, but you're sort of methodically repaying yourself, your budget, yourself, from that fund at more bite-sized increments. I don't know, again, that is I'm not a department head, that is outside of my budgeting, I don't even know that's legal. But it's just a thought that if there is a potential for some funding to be available, if we could structure it in a clever way, that it doesn't hurt anybody, whether it's the fund or the budget or the taxpayer, Michael's not here anymore, individually, then, I mean, I'm happy to do whatever legwork is needed to try to sort that out. Ken, you brought up the CPF thing, and I like that analogy. I've talked with Gordon about that analogy as well. A key difference, right, is that it's very clear what CPF funds could be used for. It's a user-derived fee, without a doubt. It's apples to apples there, right? There's a user-derived fee. But there is crystal clear legislation on what you can use this for. And if you don't use it for those CPF-specific things, you can't just use it for something else as a big pot of money that can be used to offset things. There is 1,000 different interpretations of what the legal mandate is with the Waterways Fund. I'm of the belief that if we have $209,000 in there and we don't use it for a waterways-related thing, we can't just balance some other area of the budget with that money. It should stay there to be used for the next thing that we don't want to pay for. I think trying to get to the bottom of what the mandated use of those funds is would be really, really important. I've gone back through local laws as far back as 1995, and I haven't got to the initial one yet. I'm still working on it, but so that's, I think it's a great analogy, but it's a little less clear with what we can use though.
So I think what would be helpful, which if you've already gone out for bids, you must have a document of some type that spells out clearly in these various areas of what work is being performed. Is that correct?
Yep, it was all stipulated in the bid packet. I sent it to all the board members, so you guys have that as well. Yep.
Just to clarify, because the CPF did come up in the conversation, so the WQI money, which is regulated by New York Town Law 64E, says that essentially we can use the money for wastewater treatment improvement projects, and that does include a vessel pump out station, which is defined as a project for the planning, design, acquisition, or construction of a permanent or portable device capable of removing human sewage from a marine holding tank. So if we were to get the boat, we could use WQI money for the pump out components of that.
Not the operation.
It doesn't specify the operation. Just that you can use it to purchase the mechanics for it.
And that's the new version of the law?
No, this is the existing.
Okay, it's the.
Oh, yeah.
The
It's the
latest, the
current.
one that
It's,
was just passed.
No, it's always been there.
It's always been in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I have to just go back and look at what the changes were.
To be clear, just because there was already confusion on this.
Yeah.
That's the WQI funds.
Correct.
Not
Not the
the
waterways
waterways
fund.
funds.
This is
Exactly.
separate.
Town budget.
Right. You use-
There's a lot of different things here,
Exactly.
right?
You can't use this water quality improvement WQI fund to purchase the boat, but you could use it to purchase the pump out components should you choose to do that in the future. Just clarifying that a little bit.
Are we sure? Because it didn't say mobile. I mean, it has to have a vehicle to be mobile.
Yes, but here it's saying specifically, it sounds like the device itself for the
Let's-
removal. But that's something we can look
I was gonna say,
into.
let's incorporate that part of
I
the
mean, because if we
discussion
could use it for
in.
the whole kit and caboodle, okay.
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to see us look further into
Mhm.
getting some free
Yeah, I
money for
think-
this.
I think we need to dig around a little bit.
Can tell capital planning and grants writer to go ahead and do some dive on this. With respect to, so we're not going to move forward with this at the moment. The analysis to better understand the waterways money and waterways fund, when do you want to pick that up again?
Let's see, we only have how many items?
Well, that's why I'm asking, because
I think-
I'm gonna be the one doing this, and so I need to fit this into my schedule as well. So I just need
When
private.
will it fit in your schedule? You should be answering your
After
question.
comp plan is done, but,
Oh.
but that's not gonna happen.
We talked
before
about
budget
the item,
season.
I was gonna
the
say,
the boat,
yeah, before the budget.
Yes.
six we have, but the actual moorings, you have a whole list of areas spelling out the moorings in Cockles Harbor and in Deering Harbor that this boat is used for?
No, it's not moorings, it's navigational.
Oh,
Navigational,
yes, yeah. Is that what you were, I'm sorry, I thought you were talking about the specs for the boat, like.
No, I'm looking for the navigational things, like how many, like,
Oh, yes,
you know,
we have-
when I was looking at Cockles Harbor, I thought to myself, I only know of like seven or 8 items to begin with, so I mean, it's not like there's a lot there, but maybe that's an isolated, I don't know I don't know the other areas, okay? And
Right.
that would be good to spell it out.
I don't know. the
It's
total
about,
number.
it's like
it's
50 to
probably-
70.
It's closer, it's closer.
Well, I mean, let's just look at
And
Crescent.
we have to be clear too, we don't do moorings. Just so you know. We're not doing moorings, because that came up, like, yes, we may salvage one if something breaks loose and they go out and grab it, but we're not putting in moorings.
No.
We're taking them out for
Well,
them.
last summer when N10 went missing and it ended up at Paradise Point, that was the Coast Guard that dealt with
Right,
it.
we recovered that, and then
Oh, you recovered
it's,
it.
yeah, it's a Coast Guard, that's the Coast Guard's responsibility, right? So that's a federal aid to navigation. We handle all the private aids to navigation, so that's all the navigation buoys and markers that are in our jurisdiction, right, within our purview, right? So, Cockles Harbor, just the anchorage area has 5 of its own buoys right there, right?
500,
Five of
yeah,
its own
that's what I said,
buoys, right?
the
So
white
then-
ones.
Then you have another 11 aids to navigation, you have 5 mile an hour mode, right? So there's other stuff in there as well. It's a little convoluted even for me to think about until I go, oh yeah, that's right, I got this one too. Because if I went and pulled up the spreadsheet that shows all the coordinates for everything, you look at it, you go, oh, wow, I forgot about that one, that one, that one, that one. right?
Do the
If you go out for an
area
RFP,
at Crescent
you need to
Beach.
provide that information anyhow.
And we,
What's that?
If you went out for an RFP, we'd need to have.
Right, we would have to, right, and we have that, like, that's something, I could email it to you, it's a whole list, because all of the things that we put in the water need to be permitted with the Coast Guard, right, so we have a whole process, that's, was established a long time.
You do the swim area at Crescent Beach, right?
Yes.
And wait,
and Wade's Beach.
You're in this, right, Wade's Beach? Okay.
Yes,
those are 2 public bathing,
that's true, the only two.
really the only 2 public.
Yeah, so back to
To
the
my-
budget.
Yeah, so before budget season.
Right,
I
definitely
need
before
to- yeah.
budget season, but it would be
Yeah.
good to have this very clearly defined, what does come out of waterways and what doesn't.
Yeah.
So maybe we can work on
Yeah.
really
Well, actually, I think
clarifying
it's-
it.
it's not-
That's not clear.
It shouldn't be that difficult, I mean, if,
Well, if you want history,
yeah, with the history,
I
yes.
mean, because I can tell you currently what's in there, and that's in that spreadsheet, I believe, but to go back a number of years to where it used to come from, so you have a better understanding.
I think it was the Bay Constables, I think it came out of a different, I think you hit on something, I think that's where some of the funding was coming from, a different lot, wasn't coming out of,
Taxpayer funding.
Right.
that only changed, I think, in
Jared
22 or something, right, right.
The bottom line is we want to try to get a little creative on financing this because we actually want it to happen.
It's going to create a cost at some point.
Right.
So it's just
So
where
we
is that
need-
cost going to come from?
You're going to need it to happen.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
Just be
and it
sure.
may,
It's
it
gonna
may,
have to happen.
well, yeah, and it may happen not on,
Sooner,
not on
Sooner
our,
than later would be better, but it's gonna happen.
Well, I can
think it needs that.
appreciate the concern too, Albert, that you had voiced and Gordon as well. The optics of it in budget, tight budget type things, right? Nothing is going to be cheaper. The budget is not going to be less tight next time. The boat won't be less expensive next time. And I don't mean to imply.
I
that we
suspect
need
it's
to-
even more now.
Well,
I mean, I think the 172 is probably way up there now, right?
I think to be responsible at this point, we would have to rebid the project, right? Because, unless that particular yard is really, really, really hurting for work, a 25% tariff on aluminum is pretty hard to.
Well, it just depends on, it also depends on how long they would hold the bid.
I know,
I don't know who you talk to, it could be, But if it expires, if the bid expires, then by law, we have to go out, bid it again anyway. And
It's not something,
But if it was
it's a
in
discount.
a 90,
Yeah, it's not gonna get cheaper.
And there's optics, but there's also educating the public so that they truly understand, like, how something's getting paid for.
Well, and I think that's a big part of this, is making
Mhm.
sure everybody's understanding how the budget works and where the money is coming from and how it is being spent, because I think that's some of the confusion.
Yeah. Okay.
And where's this boat being built?
Well, hypothetically, the lowest bidder that responded to this was a bidder up the island, on Long Island. It's called Sound Marine. We received a bid from another bidder in Connecticut, Chester Boat Works. Their bid was significantly higher out of the gate. Sound Marine is well-known. They build boats for Southampton Town, Huntington, I believe East Hampton. So they have a lot of work boats, pump out boats, in service locally. So we do know that they have the capacity to deliver the product that we're looking for.
But the bid has not been awarded.
Correct. They just happen to be the lowest bidder on that.
Okay.
But you didn't look in Canada or?
No, we stipulated a builder within a 100-mile radius of Shelter Island specifically. That was based on the recommendation of Response Marine. Sometimes they do a much narrower radius if you want to try to target a specific area, or you could open it up, globally, theoretically. His recommendation was to have a 100-mile radius, so that way it was still proximate enough to the island that we could get there to address design build things as they came up, and not have to send somebody to New Orleans, if you will. There's a lot of other builders.
Gotcha.
Makes sense.
which is where one of them was.
That, right, there was a builder in New Orleans.
The higher bidder. one of the
Well,
higher
he
bidders.
didn't even ultimately, he's the one
Yeah.
who bailed at the last second, right?
But he was higher, and we would have to travel.
It's also kind of nice to keep it local,
Yeah.
as local as we can.
Well, I think the component of that Bo spoke to there was also, I mean, obviously it's the bid price, but to have a boat builder that's dealt with similar projects and with a municipality, with some of the surrounding municipalities, is also another, kind of, it's, sort of a no-brainer there in a
They
sense.
have an understanding of our kind of waterways,
Well, right,
which is,
easy.
Okay.
Always good.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right, we have a few more agenda items, but we also have interviews coming up. So we are going to definitely hit on the outdoor assembly application for the library, since Terry has been patiently waiting, and so we're not going to make it for. So we're not going to make it for naught, but we may not get to Cornell Cooperative Extension. I didn't, actually, Kate, Rossi Smith is on here, but she wasn't actually going to come in. I was going to just present what needs to be done there. So I forgot that her name was attached to that. And then the waterways application we just got last night, closed the public hearing, so that can get pushed a week before next town board meeting. So outdoor assembly application.
all right. So,
Meg, start.
yeah, I did the basic vetting on this. It went past Ken and the police chief to see if they had any questions or comments. Essentially, what is happening is that the library is looking for a location to put their tent where they do all their summer programming. And because the library, as we know, is under construction, we need to, they're asking to use the lawn on the side of the Legion to put the tent. So everyone should have a copy of the application. I've reached out to both Bethany, who runs the recreation department and the summer programming, and I've reached out to the Legion themselves, and neither group had an issue with the tent being at that location. We discussed it a little bit with some employees of the library, and we were told that you would be willing, because there are other events that happen in that space in the summer. So, the Lions Club uses that space for the Memorial Day Parade barbecue. The Legion has their barbecue there. The Arts and Craft Fair happens. Sometimes they use that space, but they move the Green Expo to the other side, so it may not be an issue 10K. There's a lot of different spaces that, so one of the questions was, would the library be willing to share their tent with some of these other organizations when they had their events?
So Terry Lucas, library director, our adult programmer and our children's librarian have all of the classes from the school coming over this today for Funny Hat Day and doing park. And so they are very, very busy, and I didn't want to make them bring their funny hats here, so I'm happy to be here with this. We've always come to you for our outdoor assembly application permit. And, again, we don't have a space for it. We did think that the over at the Legion would be the best space for it. We don't use it constantly. We probably use it about 5 to 6 hours a week, but it's really important for us to be able to have the kids to do a craft under there or to have a speaker under there. Usually it's like a Friday night or a Saturday afternoon. So of course, we'd be more than willing, we'll just have to coordinate schedules, but even if the town recreation department wants to use it on nice days and there's no program for the library, we're more than happy to share the space. It's a nice tent. It was inspected by John Cronin last May, and he gave it the green light and said it was in good shape. We bought it from some kind of shelter and party rental several years ago. It's being stored inside. It's in good shape. The sail maker over in Greenport, I can't remember their name, Mills, refurbished it last summer. So it's a good tent. It's in good shape. We would love to have it in that space so we could continue to offer, some nice outdoor programs instead of we're kind of smushing the kids in the trailer right now. So it would be, we're asking for approval for that. One thing I believe is tents that are erected do need to have an annual inspection. Yeah, we can ask John to, So just, yeah, just throwing that out there. okay. We'll have him, if it's approved, we'll have him.
Terry, how did you handle bathroom facilities when you had the tent behind the library? You use the
They
library?
came into the library, and again, our programs for the kids are usually about 45 minutes, and the adult programs are never more than an hour and 15 minutes. So bathrooms have never been a huge issue. And in this case, we would just tell people to come back over to the trailer to use the bathroom. And I think in general, we don't have huge bathroom use from the tent programs. Probably, when we have the little kids for a couple of hours, it becomes an issue, but that won't happen under the tent because the weather doesn't usually allow it. So, and did kind of look into a porta potty rental, and if we have to do a porta potty rental, we won't be able to do this because our budget for programming would not allow cost of porta potty. So that's kind of unfortunately not within the budget that we have for this.
It's a requirement.
No, there's no requirement.
No, and your programs are always during library hours, so the library will be open. So. Yeah, the library is always open when we do the programs, and even if we do a Friday night dialogue, someone stays at the library just because it's a library program, so there's got to be somebody there, so.
And just so people know, we did talk about possibly using the lot next to the town hall here. However, the grass isn't really well established, and every time it rains, it floods.
Yep.
So we thought it may not be best to have them in a pond, so.
Yeah, it's like the
Legion lawn.
It's a little scary with the kids coming through the parking lot this way. They'll cross Bateman kind of at that catty corner there, and it's, people are used to the kids crossing there and other people crossing there, so it's not an unusual sight to see. And again, most of these programs, I'm gonna say 10 to 15 people, it's very rare, and occasionally happens that we have 30 or 40 people, but it's pretty rare. So maybe a couple times a summer.
You've allowed for the community to use it for their clothing exchange. I mean, you've done a lot of great programs there.
Yeah, water, and we're happy to continue to do that. And, we had all the water meetings there for a couple of years. And, the clothing swap, the woman that runs it is thinking about having it at her house because if there's no tent. So, that's maybe, not the best for her.
Yep.
And maybe not the best for the community because that's becoming a really big, important thing. So, anybody that can use it, if we're not using it, it's an open tent, there are no sides to it. It's very safe, and, we'll probably leave
some chairs there. So the chairs and tables are available if that's acceptable to the Legion. And we've done that in the past with no problem. You know, they stay there, nobody's gonna take some full chairs. So, yeah, so that's kind of the request.
Who owns the jungle land now?
What?
Who owns that piece of property?
The town.
The town,
So,
yes.
insurance?
That was gonna be the next question.
We'll get the insurance. There's insurance in the application. I don't know if you need something other than that because it's on town property, but let us know. We'll get you in a core certificate that has the insurance that you think is proper. I mean, I know it's $100, but you've always waived the fee for us before, so we would ask for that again. But we're more than happy to get the insurance that's required.
I think I would want anybody who uses the tent to go through the library and get your permission to use it.
Oh, yeah, they would have to deal with Sarah's kind of our scheduler, Sarah Garcia, who's filled out this application, has been the one that has been pushing this because she wants to be able to offer to the kids the things we've always been able to offer. And we won't be able to do that if we have to do it in the trailer. So, again, we can have anybody that wants to use it to give a call and make sure it fits within other people's schedule, because there's gonna be a lot of people. We'll have a tent calendar set up for the period of time we have it up.
Setup is in May, closure is in September.
Yes, we'd like to keep it through September. If there's a storm coming, we bring it down.
Right.
That's, we always work with Rob Strauss on this. He puts it up, make sure it's in good shape, he brings it down, and he is one that will call and say, if it's at all, I mean, it came down earlier than we wanted this year, but he said it was a little iffy. If it's a little iffy, we're always gonna go for safety at the library, always, so.
Yeah, I think the only thing is the building department needs to do the tent inspection.
Mhm.
Any,
Do you want the building department, or do you want John Cronin to do it again? He did the, we paid
If
him.
he does it, they accept it.
Yeah.
So it just saves them.
I just.
He did a pretty extensive letter last year
That's good then.
okay, so I'll ask him.
inspected to make sure it's
Yeah.
okay for the public to be under.
Chief Reed, you have a question?
Yeah, I would just make the recommendation that we provide the library with a key to our community center so that they can use the bathroom. I'd feel more comfortable with those little kids just going into our community center for the bathroom on the days that it's needed, than crossing the street to try and go back and forth to the library. We have a great working relationship with the library. I think it would make a lot of sense to just let them use that facility.
I think we'll let the recreation director work that out.
Yep.
Just because I think there was a little bit of concern about people running in and out if she has a program going.
Yeah.
So, but they can
I
work
think
that
it
out.
would be safe, but if it was, maybe we could give it a try, and if she felt that it was intrusive, we could go back to sending them back to the library. I mean, we have, during certain periods of time now in this whole process, we've sent people over here sometimes because the bathrooms haven't always been workable, and we appreciate that it's not easy to have a lot of different people using bathrooms. So we try to, we can't send people home exactly, but we try to tell them,
Exactly. But I would leave that up to your
We'll
staff.
talk to Bethany, and I think, honestly, we probably, from way back when, we've always had a key. I don't know, it's been used in years and years, but unless it's been changed, we've always had a key to that, because we've always kind of shared programming, so, yeah. It's probably in a big box somewhere.
It may not be functioning anymore. because-
Yeah, that's probably doors,
Yeah,
there was a new door.
Yeah.
So, but we'll talk to Bethany, and if she's not comfortable with it, we can assign an extra, one of our high school kids who works on these programs to stand there and walk the families across the street. If it becomes at all a concern, again, we really care about these kids and we care about their parents, and we don't, I know in the summer the traffic is heavier through there, so, we'll make sure we take whatever precautions we need to take.
Are there any other questions from the table?
I want it.
Anybody
To do it.
on Zoom who has a question? All right, so we will put this on for approval at our next town board meeting, which will be April 7th.
April 7th?
Yes. That's ahead of your May 1st proposed date, so.
Great, that's terrific, thank you. I'm going to go back to my office, but if you need me at any other point during this day, please call.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
We also have we've received 2 more outdoor assembly permits, but we're not gonna go over them today. One is for the 10K. We get that every year. And then the other one is the Mananic Yacht Club. They're proposing a regatta in September. So Chief is just talking to Coast Guard and a couple of people, getting more information before it comes to the board. All the usual suspects are meeting about the 10K on May 13th to do their pre-conference, and then they'll come to us with all the information.
So when's the Manatee Yacht Club gathering on town hall?
Wade's Beach is their proposal. So we're waiting to see if there's more information necessary before we move forward with that. That's it.
Okay, so discussion about some MOUs with Cornell Cooperative Extension will bump to next week. The Beach Class Properties Waterways application we will bump to next week. And board member reports we will also bump to next week because we need to go into an executive session for interviews. And we also want to confer briefly with legal counsel on a legal matter ahead of the first interview.
Okay.
So I'd like to close this town board meeting to go, or not close, I guess adjourn to go into executive session. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So thank you, everybody. We need to keep